Hello and welcome to the Healthcare Huddle video podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Slawson, and today we'll be discussing the first Do No Harm, the report of the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review led by Baroness Cumberledge. And today we'll be talking with Darren Thorne, Managing Director of Facere Melius. Facere Melius are a healthcare consultancy which offers a unique combination of insight, innovation and experience. They specialise in quality, governance and patient safety investigations. Hi Darren, how are you?
Hello Rachel, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm really looking forward to discussing this because it's a really hot topic. So Darren, for those who don't know, should we discuss the background of the report?
Yes, this review was announced by Jeremy Hunt back in 2018 into how the healthcare system in England responded to reports from patients about harmful side effects from medicines and medical devices. Specifically in this case, it was about Primados, sodium valproate and pelvic mesh. We think, for Facere Melius, that the themes that have been identified in this report are valuable to the NHS, not just in relation to the medical devices and the medicines. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about them.
The report has 9 recommendations and 12 themes, and we're going to be discussing those themes today. Theme 1 is no one is listening, the patient voice dismissed. What can be done to ensure that patients are listened to and their concerns are properly investigated and resolved?
That's a really important question. What we've found in some of our investigations that we've undertaken is that this is a really important point and comes up time and time again. NHS organisations need to ensure that they use open listening and avoid being defensive or even appearing arrogant and inadvertently dismissing attitudes. We've seen so many instances where listening and communication can be improved. And there are things that organisations can do. For example, boards can make sure that they hear patient stories. They need to try and get some best practice to ensure that patients are genuinely listened to in every interaction across the organisation. But most importantly, boards need to have processes to understand what's happening and to set out their ambition to hear patient stories.
Yeah, definitely. And I think once you get that voice heard at that level, they can then really understand what's happening at the grassroots, because hospitals are so massive, or these organizations are so massive, it can be very easy to get detached away from what it's like to have that patient experience at that ground level. Theme 2 is I'll never forgive myself, parents living with guilt. How do you think healthcare organizations should manage situations like this?
This is always challenging. We need to recognise the overwhelming sense of guilt parents feel when tragic events occur to their children and the impact it has on their whole family. We've seen family units being really challenged in the aftermath of such events. It's important that organisations treat the families with sensitivity, ensuring that they get access to the counselling that they need and be responsive to the family needs, helping them through that difficult time, possibly providing them with independent advocacy, or where necessary, commissioning an independent report to get to the truth and to help the family understand what happened, possibly looking for missed opportunities and ensuring that as far as it's possible that this doesn't happen again and provide learning for the future.
Yeah, because you definitely don't want to feel as a patient, if something bad has happened, that anybody else has to experience that again. You want to make sure that those lessons have been learned and no one will ever experience that. Protect other parents from experiencing that potential loss and suffering.
Yes, and I feel that it's really important that parents have confidence in whoever's looking at the issues that have occurred, whoever's investigating. We'll get to the truth as far as is practicable.
So theme 3 is I was never told. That's the failure of informed consent. How do you address the issues around clinicians gaining informed consent? I know the report makes recommendations around patient aids and the use of mobile technology to record conversations between clinicians and patients when they're making decisions in their care.
So informed consent is a right that's enshrined in law and is absolutely the right thing to do. Information must be given to patients in a clear and meaningful way, and it needs to absolutely take into consideration the patient in a holistic way. The use of language is really important, and ensuring that we don't use complicated clinical terms that could be misunderstood by parents or by patients.
Yeah, we don't want anything, you don't want anything to be misconstrued when somebody is giving their consent to something that's potentially going to change their life significantly.
Absolutely. And these
Yeah.
conversations tend to happen, very quickly. They might, and I don't think patients can always remember what's said.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming, and you might have come in thinking you were, going to be okay, and the test results are going to come back with this, and then all of a sudden there's an avalanche of information and big decisions that need to be made very quickly in some cases around things that will affect you going forward. So yeah, I think that recording conversations would be really useful. You can sit and listen to those, maybe even with your GP potentially, if you've got questions beyond that, or with somebody else that might be able to help you make sense of what's happened.
Yes, I think patients need to feel empowered to be able to ask, can I record this conversation on my phone? And clinicians shouldn't feel threatened by it. It's often not done with any untoward intent of that recording. It's normally just to help the patients either play it back with their families or, as you say, their GPs, and give them an opportunity to write questions down and make contact with the appropriate clinician in the future.
Theme 4 is redress. What we want justice. What can organisations do to help patients adversely affected feel as though they have redress?
I think that this requires some national change. Patients and families who have been impacted by avoidable harm understandably want redress. The NHS resolution system just isn't set up to support families, and they're often made to continue to fight through lawyers and mediation, even after an investigation is completed and has established the truth. So there needs to be a national redress agency, which is being proposed, but it needs to consider more than just money. It needs to look at how those parents and those families and those patients can receive appropriate treatment to where, as far as possible, return them back to the health that they were. And if they can't, then to provide long-term care.
Theme 5 is we do not know who to complain to. It's complaints. How do you manage complaints from a system level to pick up themes and trends?
I think there's a need for change across the complaint system. There needs to be a simple single pathway for complainants to access. And I think that we need to strengthen the accountability of commissioners who commission these services in complaints. I think that commissioners need to take responsibility for multi-organisational complaints, for issues that cut across pathways that are delivered by different organisations. And that possibly there's an opportunity to look at the National Guardian's Office to see if they've got a role to play in having oversight nationally of complaint issues and what people are complaining about.
Yeah, the report definitely picks up on the fact that there's a diagram in there, and it just shows how many different places a patient could end up having to put a complaint in. It's not clear. It's very complicated. There's so many organisations that might only look at a part of that complaint. And, and definitely what's been picked up in the report is there was no one place to funnel these through and actually look at these trends that were appearing in people who'd had either taken the medication or had the devices. And so, yeah, I think that needs to be pulled together and at that bigger system level, so you can really, really identify when something isn't working and help address those quickly as you can.
Yes, and in some of the investigations that we've undertaken, you can see how complainants bounce around the system, sometimes even within the same organisation, where people don't take responsibility for ensuring that the complaint is appropriately logged, that the right people look into it and it's investigated in a timely way.
Theme 6 is duty of candour, preventing future errors. What can be done to improve the culture around disclosing mistakes?
So first of all, it's worth saying it's just really important that people are open and honest and being told the truth when something goes wrong. I think one of the challenges here is, although duty of candour continues to be the law, and you can say sorry without admitting liability, the being open policy was launched back in 2005 by the Patient Safety Agency. And I think the challenge over the period of the last 15 years is how do we keep policy initiatives that were made 15 years ago, when the advocating agency just was abolished back in 2012. So all those people that will have understood the being open policy and trained and received kind of really strong guidance about it's the right thing to do, a significant number of those will have moved on, possibly even retired and left the NHS completely. The duty of candour law came in 2014, and boards need to be making sure that they're monitoring the compliance of duty of candour within their organisations. And similarly, commissioners need to be monitoring the organisations that they commission to ensure that duty of candour is complied with. And finally, it's regulated by the CQC. So when they come in and they look at safety and well led, they will check to see that a random sample of patients who have come to harm have had the appropriate candour applied.
Theme number 7 is conflicts of interest. We deserve to know. How can we improve transparency and conflicts of interest?
This is interesting. It's only right if a clinician's being paid or receives benefits to influence or promote a product that there's transparency about who's giving them that benefit. So who and possibly even what the benefit is or the amount of money. There is a national conflict of interest policy, but I think one of our challenges, particularly in hospitals, is how do you get every consultant to declare their conflicts of interest onto a register and then publish that so that it's open and transparent. Interestingly, we're writing an article about this, and there'll be something published in the coming days.
Oh, brilliant. So look out on the Facere Melius website. I will leave a link in the description so you can go to the website in a few days and check that one out. So theme 8 is holding to account, guidelines and quality. How do we ensure quality monitoring and clinical guidelines are implemented across the NHS?
Yes, so there's a statutory requirement for NHS organisations to implement NICE guidance, particularly technology appraisals. And there's also guidance and a requirement for commissioners to fund fund drugs that are approved by NICE. It's so important that organisations prioritise clinical audit and the monitoring of clinical quality standards so that they know that they are compliant with national guidance that's been published by NICE. We've done a number of investigations where clinical guidance isn't followed, either that's been developed locally or it is the national guidance, and there's no real clinical rationale when we've looked objectively as to why the patient didn't get the care that was in effect dictated nationally. I think it's really important that boards maintain pressure on organisations to review and to keep their local guidance up to date in line with the national publications.
That makes sense, and then that will cover everybody for any issues that do come up.
Yes, and organisations can assure themselves that the care that they're delivering is in line with the national guidance.
Theme 9 is collect once and use often, data capture and the electronic record. And then theme 10 is collecting what matters, databases and registries. Both are around data. Could you elaborate on them?
Yeah, so there are some subtleties in the difference between the themes. So the first theme is around how do we collect information about patients and make it available at the point that it's needed. So I think it's fair to say that patients don't recognise organisational boundaries in the NHS, and it's not really appropriate that they need to. Their data should be shared securely, but be available seamlessly. And I think that needs to go deeper than the single care record or the spine, as it's sometimes referred to. The second theme number 10, which is about collecting what matters, focuses on databases and registries. And we've seen quite a few examples already over time where the efficiency of a medical device changes. So it's a hip replacement is a good example. There are several different types of hip joint that you can use, and some have different benefits. And then occasionally, at some point in the future, you will realise that the efficacy or the effectiveness of a particular device isn't as it was originally thought. And we have had occasions where there have been national recall programs where people have had to have specific joints replaced so that they don't cause any future harm. And that involves calling in lots of patients, going back through a manual trawls of health records if there aren't these databases and registries of who has been implanted with what.
Wow, that sounds time consuming. To have to go back through all the records.
Yes. I mean, it makes sense that information is captured. In days gone by, there would be theatre books that are completed that sit in each theatre, and then once the book's full, someone goes and puts it in a box, and then suddenly if there's an issue with a particular device, then the books come out and people trawl through the pages to identify which patients have had which devices put in.
Theme 11 is time to change focus, regulation of medicines and devices and potential reforms. What are your thoughts on this?
So regulatory reform needs to be considered carefully. It definitely needs to be strengthened in terms of what's currently there, and we need to close some of the gaps that have been identified. But we need to avoid unintended consequences and need to recognise that if we're taking the decision to close an organisation and to set up a new organisation, that takes time and that costs money. So I would favour looking at the regulatory reform and looking to see where it can be strengthened and where gaps can be closed, not necessarily abolishing organisation and current organisations.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you've already got an organisation there that could be changed to encompass that and cover the gaps, then why not use it? Yeah, it takes a lot of energy, as you say, and resources to start anything up. Theme 12 is patient safety, doing it better. The report recommends the employment of a patient safety commissioner. How do you think this will work in practice?
So we need an organisation responsible for patient safety that spans, I think, wider than the NHS. I think it needs to span all public sector organisations and not be constrained by organisational boundaries. So what I mean by that is that it needs to include the NHS and all parts of it, but also local authority, so we cover social, adult and children's care. And I think even looking into the police and possibly even fire provision, and there will be other public sector services that need to be encompassed in that patient safety commissioner responsibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the report actually covered other areas like the DWP, so people getting hold of benefits and things, and also schooling for children to monitor how the effects of anything that happened to them were taken through into their education.
Absolutely. They're really good examples of how the responsibility of a patient safety commissioner could be expanded.
So Darren, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, my final message is we've looked at the report. We think there's some really good stuff in it. It makes some really good points, and particularly across the 12 themes. But people should look at it, organisations should consider it in its widest sense, because the things that have been identified in this report, things that we absolutely have seen time and time again across the work that we do when we undertake investigations into incidents. So yeah, please read it and look at it and consider it in its widest sense. Finally, we need to remember that there are patients and families that have been involved in these tragic things that have happened and captured in this report, and our thoughts are with them.
Yeah, it's difficult reading, but I think it's really important for people to read it. Thank you, Darren, so much for joining me today and discussing this really important topic. And I think, as you say, the themes can be applied to everywhere within health and social care, and people should read the report. It's really important. You can follow Facere Melius on LinkedIn and Twitter, so I will leave the links in the description below. Thank you so much for listening to the Healthcare Huddle video podcast. Please like and subscribe, stay safe, and we will see you next time.